All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our free webinar this afternoon about how to convert workshop or face-to-face training into some online e-learning using the Articulate 360 suite of products. For those that have met me before, my name is Matt Blackstock. I'm the learning manager here at Be Online Learning. I've had a look at a couple of names in the chat. There's a few returning people, so welcome back for those that have come back to spend some time with us again. And a great big welcome to anyone who's brand new that hasn't been with Be Online before. Basically, we run these free webinars a bit sporadically, but we tend to put them around the place. But we do plenty of advertising leading up to them in regards to when they're available and when they're happening. So if you've done any of our certified training with us, you'd probably be a member of our alumni group. So you'll see those advertisings via the alumni group. Or if you just keep an eye on our webpage, you'll definitely be able to see the advertisements on what's coming up soon and also what to keep an eye out for. Now, today's session, probably just before we get into it, very quick overview of who we are. We've been kicking around in Australia since about 2006. We are based in Australia. We have three main parts to our business: our professional development arm, which is our certified articulate training. So we partner with Articulate to deliver their certified training programs throughout the Australia and New Zealand marketplace. We also have our own in-house e-learning designs essentials program, which is all about designing e-learning, of course, hence why it's called that. And also our master storyline program, which isn't a certified program, but it's a program that we do run in-house for anyone who's looking for some advanced features when it comes to playing with Storyline 360. We're also developers within our Articulate suite of products as well. If we're not delivering webinars like this or running training, we're usually building training for people, whether it's just building something they've already designed or whether it's actually partnering with them to build something from scratch. And probably the final part of our business that you may or may not be aware of is our Birch Learning Platform, which is a software platform which can manage all of your learning that's required within your organization, whether it be face-to-face learning in a workshop environment, webinar-based learning like this, self-directed e-learning, or even on-the-job assessment. We can certainly help you out with any of those particular needs if you're looking at putting something together in your organization. So if any of that is of interest to you, those other products and services, please don't hesitate to throw some questions in the chat or to touch base with us after the session as well. But let's get into today's session. We've only got about 30 or 40 minutes to kick it. So I want to kind of give you some ideas in regards to what you may already have within your organization from a face-to-face training situation and how you can convert that into an online place. And what I try and do whenever I develop e-learning is there's nothing worse than having the same old read, click next, read, click next, read, click next, do a quiz, which unfortunately a lot of e-learning kind of defaults to that. So what we try and do is we want to look at ways that we can actually engage people much more in the actual e-learning process, get them motivated to learn more about it, but also make the training more meaningful and also memorable for them, not only as they complete the training, but also as they apply it on the job. And there are a couple of activities that are done within face-to-face training that do this really, really well. And that's kind of what I want to touch on today is kind of show you how you could replicate these within an online early learning environment. Now, if there are any questions during the session today, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I will try and address them as part of the presentation. If not, I will address them post the session as well. So here are three kind of ideas that we can use when it comes to converting a face-to-face workshop situation into an online one. And that is the idea of questions and answers, also group discussion, and also what I like to call instructor war stories. So things like group discussion and Q&A. Well, Q&A, we're all used to seeing multiple choice questions within an e-learning course, but you can do so much more with Q&A with a product like Articulate Storyline 360 as well. And group discussion is something people go, well, hang on a sec, if I'm sitting within an e-learning module, how do I have a discussion with other people? And the thing is, you don't necessarily have to have that discussion within the e-learning module itself. You can have it in other platforms to support what's going on in the e-learning module. So I want to kind of share some ideas with that as well. And finally, instructor war stories. Well, they're kind of the stories facilitators tell that have a lot of value, like case studies or experiences that they've encountered themselves, that they will actually want to share with their audience or their learners to reinforce a point or to help get to a particular outcome. So if we dig in these a bit more, if you look at Q&A, the great thing about a face-to-face session is you've got an instructor sitting there in the learning room with you. And so you can ask them questions as you're going through an actual learning process, but they can also lead the discussion through questions. And this idea of the rhetorical question, like learning through, like taking the learner through the key learning points, getting them to think about it. And this can be really quite powerful. Hence why Socrates used to do the Socratic method, thousands of years ago, by asking questions. Because if you ask questions of a learner, you're not just encouraging them to memorize information, you're also stimulating them and encouraging them to question assumptions and also to bring together their own understanding of what everything means. And this can be missed in self-directed learning unless you've got some ideas on how you can capture that as well. So we'll have a look at some examples in regards to that. As far as group discussion goes, the great thing about group discussion is what I love about that in a workshop situation is that you're getting ideas from the information the instructor is proposing or posing, but also learning from the other people in that workshop as they contribute and answer questions and throw in other ideas as well. The thing I love about that kind of conversation is it really encourages cognitive learning, i.e., engaging with that new information and connecting it to what we already know. Now, that can be a real challenge in the online learning space without the right tools or direction, but it is actually possible. And I want to show you a couple of examples on how you can do that today as well. And the final area is this idea of war stories, which, as I said, these are very, very valuable because they're real life examples and experiences that the facilitator usually shares with the learners. They're realistic, they're authentic, and they say, let me tell you about the time X, Y, Z happened. So those stories, if you don't kind of grab those as part of the e-learning experience, they can be lost. And that's a lot of value that can be introduced to the course as well. And the reason why I love those war stories is as human beings, we tend to engage much better with stories than we do with bullet points. It's easier to recall a story as opposed to just a list of facts. It's engaging and it makes us think about it. So I want to show you some examples today also where you can capture that idea of the instructor war story and present those to your learner as well. So let's get into the first idea first, which is this idea of the Q&A. And there's three examples I want to show you. One is asking questions to break up the e-learning, not just clicking through the module to get to the end as soon as possible, because that gives the learner a chance to pause and reflect on what they're learning and brings the focus back to the key learning outcomes. So I'll show you a couple of examples in regards to that. The other thing is you've got this idea of agreed best practice with when you've got a Q&A session in a face-to-face workshop. By throwing all these ideas in and getting all sorts of different like points of view and experiences, you can get down to a summary of an agreed best practice, which people can then take away and use in the workplace as well. And again, that's something that you can actually accommodate with an online learning environment as well. And finally, which I also find important, is asking questions to summarize information. You've got all this multiple information coming to you throughout the course. So there's a great opportunity to stop and consolidate that information and then access it as well. So let me give you some examples on how you could see that. So let me just change my screen. There we go. And let's bring up this guy here. Just check I'm sharing the right screen, which I am, which is good. So here's this idea of Q&A. And the first thing is there's no reason why you can't ask just reflective questions as you go through the course. These aren't expecting an answer. There's nowhere for the learner to put stuff, but it allows them to pause and go, okay, of this information I've learned, what does it actually mean? And it's a great way that people can just have a stop and think about consolidating their information. There's no stress or pressure because there's no assessment here. There's no answers. Now, some people might say, well, some people just skip past it, and some people will. But those that are really like motivated to get into your course, they'll actually think about these questions and go, okay, what does it actually mean based on what I already know, plus what I've learned within the actual course itself, and just slows down that process as they go through. The other way you can do it, which most people are probably used to, is the idea of a check your understanding question. Now, we've all seen these. Again, these are questions, they're not assessed, but they get the learner to go, okay, based on what I've learned, how would I apply that information? And the good thing about it, if you get it right, a good instructor during a Q&A gives positive feedback or reconstructive feedback if they need to redirect them as well. And that is a great thing that you can use in regards to that feedback as well, providing that reinforcement or providing the idea of, hey, you got it wrong. Here's some extra information you really should look at. All right. Sorry about that. There's a couple of people in the waiting room, so just let them in. That's all good. The other thing where questions can really come into play are ideas like this. Now, this is a course we put together for an organization called the Office of Transport Security. And to set the scene, this was about how you could identify someone who's applying for a job, both through their photo identification and also through their signature. So what the training looked at was ways that you could do a facial recognition match, just with the person sitting there in front of you against a picture or a reference, and also doing some signature matching against their original signature, maybe on their application, and what they've signed there in front of you as well. So with this one, we can click on the ID to have a bit of a closer look and take our eyes through, okay, is this the same person? It's pretty obvious it is the same person in this case, but there is a process to follow. And also with the signature matching as well. So having a look at, here's the original signature that was provided as part of the application, and here's the signature that we now have by getting this person to sign in front of us. And the idea behind this course was to identify that the person who you're actually talking to is the person who's applying for the job. Because the Office of Transport Security looks after people that work in our airports and also in our marine ports. So it makes sure that people are who they say they are to avoid things like drug trafficking and so forth. But what I like about this is it's asking the question to say, is this person who they say they are? And you can say, yep, I'm satisfied this person is who they say they are. But rather than just rushing ahead and telling you whether you're correct or incorrect, it says, okay, what are your reasons for making that decision? So it gives the learner a chance to consolidate, okay, so what have I learned in the course? How have I applied this to this particular situation? So they might say, Kwan's facial features are, blah, blah, blah. And the signature matched because of whatever they used within the actual course while they applied it. So the idea of saying, are you sure, just gets them to stop and go, oh, hang on a sec. Let me just self-assess and make sure that I've applied all the information I should have applied here. And this is really handy because rather than just rushing ahead and telling them whether they got something right or wrong, it gets them to stop and think about it. Did I actually think that through before I made that response? Now, the great thing about this particular question, I've used just a capture point to capture that feedback. And when I hit submit, it actually shows me what the learner said. This is how I identified this individual, plus gives some ideas for what I should have been looking for as well. And this process of capture and compare is a really powerful process you can use throughout Articulate 360 to actually capture a lot of information when it comes to Q&A and war stories, and also the idea of group discussion as well. All right, so let's continue on with that one. You can take that one step further. Again, you can give them an opportunity to practice what they've been looking at. So I've just learned all about different types of questions, open questions, closed questions, or probing questions. So now I've got an opportunity here where I can actually pose my own questions. So, this is my open question, which I'll probably spell incorrectly because I'm typing really fast. My probing question, so why did you decide to blah, blah, blah? And my closed question, is this usual or whatever? So it allows the learner to apply that knowledge again. If they can't remember what an open question was, we can provide them with an opportunity to review what an open question was. And what I've done here is I've used a light box just to bring in that original training information. They can review it, go, okay, I should start the question with tell, describe, or explain, as the case may be. So then they can close that, go back and add the extra information. And this uses that capture and compare point as well, because once I submit it, it says, here's what you said, here's some best practice. Again, here's what you said and best practice. So you can see it kind of gets the learner engaged with what's actually happening on the screen and doing something with what's happening on the screen too, not just kind of sitting there and passively taking it all in. So a great way that you can kind of mimic that idea of working with an instructor to give those best practice kind of answers. And you can also do things like opportunities for the learner to summarize what they've learned. So, this one's why it's important to keep warm while walking around St. Paul's Cathedral, because it's cold, maybe, uh, and it will whatever. So again, I'm getting that information. I'm encouraging them to interact and then check their answer as well. Okay. So these are the idea we can really bring in those additional
Quick
questions from the
quiz.
workplace.
Read the question and type your
And
response
that
in the...
scales as well. You can make it a really, really basic type of question right up to a more involved question. Like this is a course that we developed for the ACCC, which talked about the ideas of market power. So the learner has gone through quite a bit of information to this point in time. Then they can summarize that for themselves here. Now, the nice thing about this one is they can then take that information again and compare it to a best practice or to make sure they're hitting the right learning points on the head. And if we move on, we can see various variations on this as well. Like this is an example of a case study, so here's a story. All right, have a read of it, think about it, and then it asks you some questions about that. What would you do in this situation? So again, it gives them an opportunity to write down some information, whatever that might be, and then compare that to, again, some best practice ideas. And this can get as simple or as complex as you want. So this is another case study. Again, the learner could make quite an involved response on what it is based on what they've learnt, and then they can submit that answer, again, comparing to best practice. So that's some good ideas where they can check and compare. And the final couple of examples I just want to share with you is something that I actually like in regards to Storyline 360, because a lot of the time questions are captured within the e-learning course itself, but not so anymore. You can print out any of this information that you capture. So for example, you might have a setup like this where you might want to get a learner to do some strategic planning, to answer some questions. So this one talks about what it means to you. So, it means the following, and then I can add my answer. Now, when I hit save and continue, that's being saved, and I can keep answering additional questions. So, what's the GROW model? What's it stand for? How would you use it? Okay. Again, save and continue. But when I get to this final slide, it's collecting all my responses as I go through the e-learning, and it gives me the opportunity to print that out and provide that to my facilitator, my assessor, my coach, my colleague, or whatever the case may be. There you go. So that's a really handy one that you can bring into play when it comes to you want to give people something hard copy to walk away from to capture their responses and also what they've learned as well. Okay, so that gives us the idea of the Q&A stuff. Let's have a look at what else we've got when it comes to group discussion. Okay, so with group discussion, what this tends to do is it gives you the opportunity to lead the learner through a particular learning point. And what tends to happen in a face-to-face environment, the instructor will pose a question and then get the learners to give their 2 cents. And then from that, the group together in the workshop works out, okay, what's the answers to this? Or they just really dig into what something is all about. So that's one aspect of that instructor-led discussion or that group discussion. Other aspects, you might want people to do group work, like work together to present a series of answers. Or you just want them to discuss a particular point. So how do you capture that in a face-to-face environment? It's quite easy. You might use butcher's paper or a whiteboard or a workbook. But in the e-learning environment, again, it's a slightly different situation. And also requires a little bit of outside the box thinking. So instructor-led discussion, let me give you an example of how you could do that. And it's not actually using Storyline 360, it's using Review 360. Now, those that are familiar with the Articulate 360 suite of applications, Review 360 is a user reviewing system. You can publish Storyline, Rise, Peak, or Replay to review, and then provide a link to anyone to look at that course or that video and provide feedback to you. But what if we use that slightly where we publish a course to review, and rather than getting feedback from reviewers, we actually get our learners to jump on there and give us feedback? So let me give you an example. All right. This is a course that we created on learner experience design. It's created in Rise. It's an overview, right? So it talks about what learner experience design is all about. My mouse doesn't want to work for some reason. Technology, it's a great thing when it works. So with this one, I've created my course. I've published it to review. Turn off and on again, exactly, Alana. Hopefully that'll work. So what I've done is I've created my course. Looks like it's gonna play up on me here. So let's just try this again. So I've published the course to review, and I've provided that link to all of my learners. So my learners can all view the actual course. And then what I've done is I've encouraged them to give me some actual feedback in regards to it. So for example, I've posed the question, read through the ideas about learner experience design, share your ideas around it, indicate where you've used the ideas in your own work, and then comment on 3 other people's ideas. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them, etc.? So that gives a really good review. For some reason, the first page isn't opening. But then it encourages the learner to go through. So as you can see here, as the course goes through, the learner reads a particular section and they give some feedback. So Susie has said, yep, I've liked these particular points. As we go a bit further on, we see what John has had to say about that. So he's gone, yep, great links, good stuff. Susie's then talked back, said, here's some additional links. All right. So it actually kind of creates an informal forum where you can all view the same content and then provide feedback on that content as well. And then as you come down, you can see, yep, people are giving their points of view. So John here has given his point of view. Susie's jumped on, said what she agrees with, also thrown in some additional ideas. And then Frank's jumped on and said, yeah, I love both of that, but what about this as well? So you can see that this kind of still supports that group discussion process, even though it's asynchronous. It's not happening at the same time, but the discussion is definitely there. And it also allows the instructor to jump back in and say, yep, here's some good feedback, you're on the right track or you're not on the right track, or to ask additional questions to encourage the learners to go down a particular path of inquiry as well. So that's not something review is commonly used for, but is a great way that you can do that. Share some additional resources and also provide information backwards and forwards as well. So let's see if my front page finally loaded. Having some issues, maybe because I've got so much open. All right, let's minimize that. Cancel that. The other thing is, away from that, if you want to get some group work happening, you might send out the same module to multiple people. So this is a course kind of showing, yep, we're going to create a short film. Let's go and scout some locations. What are the type of things we should look for? And how do we secure permissions to get that information? So again, each learner can access this on their own, add their own feedback, whatever that might be. Okay. And then when they hit next, it says, okay, so you've said this is what you should look for. This is how you should secure permissions. And again, it's giving the opportunity to print that. So a learner can print that to take back to a wider group to discuss further, or to stick in a portfolio of discussion pieces, or something of like recognition of prior learning or a portfolio as part of the assessment. They can present that to their facilitator or their assessor to go through that information as well. So again, it may not suit all situations, but it's a great way that we can get people kind of giving their 2 cents piece and then sharing that out amongst others as well. Which brings us to our final idea, and that was the idea of the instructor war stories. So the great thing that I love about the instructor's war stories is that person leading you through a particular experience, sharing hey, you'll never believe what happened. This is a situation. Don't find yourself in this situation. Or, hey, this customer feedback was brilliant because the individual did this, this, and this. So it really allows the instructor to share a concept or just something that really highlights or reinforces the learning outcomes that are being created. So how do we capture that within an e-learning environment? Okay, that's one thing to look at. Another thing is the instructor giving case studies, so saying, okay, we want to share some ideas, or providing further examples about, rather than actually telling the story, let's show the learner the story and get some feedback on it. So these are some other ideas that we can take from that workshop environment into that e-learning environment. So again, let's get out of here, pop on down. And this one is me talking. All right, let me just put some sound on. So bad coffee. And there's also different ways that you can make coffee. And depending on how you make it, can give you a good brew or a not so good brew. Have a look at these guys over here. There are 3 different ways you can actually make coffee at home. Choose one, have a look at it, and let's talk about it in a bit more detail on the next slide. So the idea behind this is, yes, I'm now videotaping the instructor, but why not? Why can't I use my webcam, or why can't I use my iPhone or my smartphone to actually videotape them telling the story or introducing what they're going to be looking at? And this comes back to that idea of the guide on the side, like you've got a video of a talking head talking them through a particular process. So with this training course, it's all about different ways to make coffee, instant coffee, pod machine coffee, or espresso machine coffee. So what the learner can do is they can choose one of these processes or procedures, and it doesn't have to be coffee. It could be anything. It could be manual handling or work health and safety or whatever the case may be. But when they make that choice, so you've chosen the pod machine coffee. Great choice. That gives you a really good balance between speed and also quality of the final product. If you have a look at the machine on my left, you'll notice there's a heap of markers on various areas on the product. Click on each of those to learn more about making your own perfect cup of pod machine coffee. Go ahead, I'll wait here, but when you're ready to move on, just hit next and we'll talk about it in a bit more detail. So you can use video to introduce what the session is actually about. And that gives the learner an opportunity to actually have someone talking through the process, and then they can go through and have a look at what they need to do. So that guide on the side can give them those instructions on how to actually process it, work their way through it, etc. So again, that's another great way where the instructor-led session can also be generated or put into an e-learning course as well. The other way you could do it, as I said, is use it for feedback. So rather than just providing text feedback, use video to give the learner feedback based on the choices they've made. Again, that's a great way we can capture that kind of instructor-led interaction. So for example, this course here is a counseling course, all right? One we've developed from a number of years ago, but it's a scenario. So it takes the learner through the types of questions to ask if they were counseling a client, and also provides feedback based on what the choices are they make. So for example, with this one, Ron's feeling a bit sad. How do we want to approach that? Well, we could say, sorry to hear that. Where were you when you told me you started to feel sad? Get over yourself. You don't need to be always so miserable. Or just a straight, okay, why are you sad? So if we go with what's probably the best answer, I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me where you were when you started to feel sad? We make a choice and there's a consequence for that choice, but also the instructor comes in again as kind of the coach or the guy on the side and says why it was the best choice and reinforces that choice as well. Here we go. Great choice. You empathize with Ron and you also asked him an open question. The benefit of asking the open question is it allowed you to get some more triggers as to why he was feeling the way he is. You're doing well. Try the next activity. And if I'd answered it incorrectly, it would have been a video from my, again, guide on the side saying, hey, listen, you've made a mistake. Here's why you've made that mistake. Have a think about these things and then go back and try again. So it gives the interaction a bit more personality as opposed to just being a bit of text reading on the page. All right, let's have a look at our next one. This is another great way where you can use those war stories. Rather than just telling the story, you dramatize it or turn it into a situation where you want to present to the learner what it is they're going to talk about. Now, if anyone who's done any training with us before, they might have seen this course before. It is an older one, but it's a really good example of what we call behavior modeling. And what behavior modeling does is the learner watches the situation unfurl and then they make comments on that situation as well. So I won't play the whole thing, I'll just play a little bit of it, but it gives you an idea of what that war story could be if it's dramatized, and then gives an opportunity to show that to the learner, and then invites the learner to critique or comment on that as well. So here we go.
How'd you go, mate?
Well, after the trouble with that last one, I finally got the job done.
Yeah, great. No worries. That'll be a day's charge on the credit card.
If you think that I'm going to pay for one of your stuff-ups, mate, you've got to be kidding. The machine breaking down was not my fault. Even your driver said that, and it put my whole day's schedule behind. Where's your boss?
Manager's on his RDO.
Well, I'm not going to pay for that heap of garbage.
So I'll kill the volume there, but you can see the video goes on and invites the learner to actually comment on it. So once the video finishes, the learner pops over here and they say what the salesperson should have done. Okay. And they can make up as much feedback as they want. It does mention there are 8 possible improvements that the learner could do, but it allows them to take that war story, watch the dramatization, and then also critique it as well. So if I go forward and check my answers, it says, okay, here's what happened. How'd you go? Did you pick up the same type of things? Did you pick up the incorrect things? Whatever the case may be. And the good thing about that is not only does it kind of share what a bad job might look like, but it also would share what a good job looks like. So they get the other side of the picture, you know, what the customer service person does really, really well. And again, invites the learner to comment on what went really, really well. Again, applying the information, but also drawing on their own background and experience to make that analysis as well. All right. And then one more, finally, with that war story setup, is that you can go just really, really straightforward with it. And that is videotape your instructor sharing advice. So rather than the instructor running the workshop face-to-face, you could actually still convert opponents into an online course, and then invite the learner to play some very short videos of the instructor sharing those war stories. So this is a course we did for an organization called Janssen a number of years ago. We're talking about account management, a few other bits and pieces. And this is one of their subject matter experts or facilitators who we just asked some questions of and recorded their responses. And you can see how long each of the videos go for. The thing I love about this is it engages the learner to actually hear what someone has to say, can still capture those war stories, and also puts the control of how much they want to dig into their hands. So if I go to the introduction, for example, better turn my volume back on.
Over the years at Janssen. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the difference between the medical science liaison role and account management. Now, on the face of it, both of those are actually quite similar. They're both key members of the...
And on it would go. So that's another great way we can capture those stories or that value and then share that with our learners once more. Okay. So there we go, guys. That's kind of a very brief overview of some various ways that we can actually convert some face-to-face sessions into some online sessions, whether it be Q&A or instructor-led sessions or sharing those war stories, or even getting more of that group discussion happening. If you start playing with some of the capabilities that are available within Storyline or Rise, or even reusing things for maybe not what they originally were designed for, like review, you can actually capture a lot of those ideas in an online environment and test the learner on those as well. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the official part of the presentation. So we've still got about 5 minutes up our sleeve, which is great. So good option to ask any questions if you have any. If you don't, that's the official part over. We have recorded the session, so you will receive a copy of this recording later on. There was a question earlier on about accessing the slides. The slides are very, very basic, Elkie, so we don't really send them out. But if you have a look at the video presentation, you can pretty much pick them up from there anyway. It just kind of gives an overview of those bits and pieces. All right, so there we go. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, you are good to go. Thank you so much for coming along today. Thanks for spending 30 or 40 minutes with us, just going through some ideas and also sharing those ideas as well. No worries. Have a great long weekend. My pleasure. You're welcome, guys. Thank you.